Welcome to the Deep Chat.
All right, Kyle. The question of the day is, does Google or OpenAI actually have a moat with AI?
Wow, that is a very good question, especially in light of the letter that came out. While I know Gloom and Doom is leaning towards no, I'm going to say yes, but not a very, strong moat.
I was going to say no, but that's probably because I'm influenced by having read that article and also some of our conversations in the past with regard to how quickly open source adapts when new information is put out there and new algorithms. So let's unpack it. First, the letter that was leaked purportedly comes from inside Google. It's been verified according to the article that we read. It was on a public Discord server. It originates from a researcher within Google, and it's verified authenticity. Basically, it says we have no moat, that Google has no moat, and then subheading, and neither does OpenAI. In short, the moat doesn't exist because of the very nature of open source and the fact that the Meta LLM model was leaked recently. So does that about sum it up, Kyle?
Yeah, do you think we should define a moat, or will people be clear on that?
No, let's define it. So a moat is a...
There used to be castles.
Yes, exactly. That protect you against being overcome. So in a business sense, it's, do we have an edge that we can keep and keep growing?
If I sell tacos, someone else can come move right next to me and also sell tacos. I don't have secret access to flour or ingredients or something like that.
There is definitely no taco moat. That's right.
Now, Google does have a moat on search. Their ability to crawl the internet is something that is very difficult to replicate at scale.
Very much so. And they have a large history of optimizing for it and data sets going really far back.
Like if someone asked me to build my own search engine, I don't even know how big of a check I would have to ask for. It would be large because I need a giant data center and I need to start crawling the whole internet.
That's right. Nobody's going to do that. In one sense, I could argue that Google does have something of a moat because when you want to retrain some of these models, you might want to pull from new data sources or newer data. And in that retraining process, they have an advantage because they can easily pull that data.
Well, I'm going to argue that point because remember when I said Google has a moat in search to be done at scale? If I wanted to do a search engine that captured all the local businesses in my town of, under 1 million people, I can do that. I don't need a big investment. I can build that search engine because it's specific to, in my example, one geolocation. Could be specific to a niche, like you're going to index all of the comic book fandom websites. And maybe if I take a narrow approach like that, first of all, it makes it technologically feasible. And then second of all, it takes away Google's advantage, really.
It takes away Google's advantage if you were doing a more fine-tuned search.
Something more narrow. Like the moat they have is scale. So what if I want to build a search engine that doesn't need scale?
Right, if you want to be very specific and build a search engine for PubMed articles.
I can crawl all of those. I can build that. And maybe my specific focus in that area, hiring a team that's from that industry, we could even have a leg up.
Right, and better results because you actually are fine-tuning the algorithm to find precisely what they want in the context of this medical stuff, right?
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, that makes sense. They do have that at scale. So what are the moats that you speak of? Why do you say that they have something of a moat? It's not a great one, but they have something. So what are you talking about?
I think it's more in their infrastructure and ability to deploy a product and a solution, again, at scale. So if they want to suddenly have something that asks you a few questions, a conversational agent, and helps you organize, a dinner date, including restaurant reservation and movie reservation, all that sort of stuff. That could be something a small business takes on, but Google could just say, oh, we put that right here on our homepage, or we integrate it into Gmail.
So the ability to expose products and create an interface to them to a wide audience. If someone, a competitor, wanted to come into the place and create a very specific product, it seems to me that it would be easier for Google to do those very integrated products. And what I mean by that is a virtual assistant being able to reach out to your email, being able to make a phone call, being able to execute on multiple systems is where Google would have an easier time because they own a lot of that infrastructure, right?
Yeah.
Whereas some of the more open source models might be targeting a piece of that. And it would be, I think, harder for some of this open source work to create a more integrated system like that.
True. Yeah.
So I think we're on the same page there. That does make sense. Now let's talk about a few of the things that the article brings up. What does it mean when it says LLMs on a phone? People are running foundational models on a Pixel 6. Before the leaked model, the Meta model, what was the state of the art and how did that change?
Well, before the leak, you didn't try and run a large language model on a phone. It actually seemed kind of absurd. If anything, I would have said you make the phone a thin client. It communicates with a server that does the large language model because large language models require a whole bunch of really fast compute, especially to train. But in this case, I think they're just talking about the inferencing. So let's assume the model's trained, but you want to run it locally on your phone and talk to it, and the same way you talk to ChatGPT. It's going to be slower because, your phone doesn't have the world's greatest hardware by design, but it does have pretty impressive hardware. I'm a little surprised they got it running there, but, people get Doom 2 to run on the Raspberry Pi and stuff like that, so I guess I shouldn't be surprised.
Right. So the significance of this is simply to say that Moat doesn't exist if people can easily stand up a foundational model wherever they want. And that includes on their home computer, somewhere in the cloud, because it's possible, right?
Yeah, they can take the idea and run with it.
Let's take a look at something else. Multimodality, the current multimodal science QA SOTA was trained in an hour. Do you know anything about that?
I do, yeah. So that's a question and answering data set specifically about science topics. This is not necessarily a real question, but one might be, what is a meniscus? And you expected to know that that's the way that water kind of makes that U shape when you put it in a test tube or something like that. And it's questions along those lines that you are expected to have scientific background to be able to answer correctly.
Do you know why it was able to be trained in an hour? Because that seems like a significant feat, because prior to this, as far as I understand it, the training was the thing that required massive compute.
Yes. So I think a combination of factors are at play in saying that only trained in 1 hour. First, that it's a transfer learning training. They took the base model, which has, some low-level scientific knowledge to be presumed in it, but maybe wouldn't pass that test I was describing. And they used that as the starting point and then did more training, I guess an hour's worth, in order to train specifically on the science question answering data set so that the new learning that the base model would be enriched with would be exclusively focused on science topics.
That makes sense. So the outcome of this is it would enable open source users of the base model to be able to have very custom models trained for specific purposes rather quickly. Right?
Yeah, you don't need to go to Google and ask them to do it or get their blessing or anything like that. I'll just do it on my own.
So, but can't you go to OpenAPI right now and say, I want to train a custom model?
That I'm not 100% sure of. I don't know if they offer custom models as a service. I wouldn't do that with an API. I would do that more. I am doing that like at a little bit lower level way, but I'm sure that product will exist soon if it doesn't exist now.
Right. But the difference here is that this is in the hands of the developers that can execute on this without the need of that third party.
True. Yep.
And so they can customize that interface once they have the model that's been trained. They can customize the interface without paying OpenAI.
Right.
So it cuts out OpenAI being the service that provides the actual AI output.
That's right. You don't have to go to them for it.
So when we're talking about a moat, this is exactly an example of where that moat is quickly disappearing.
If you want to sell Subway sandwiches, you have to work with Subway Corporation to get a franchise. OpenAI cannot tell me what to do.
All right, so here, check this out. So as the article continues, it says that Google holds a slight edge in terms of quality, but the gap is closing astonishingly quick. Now, that's a big word, astonishing. What do you think of that?
I think that's fair. I'd like to know what they mean more by that. Quality is really hard to assess, but there are some decent metrics and measures out there. So I will grant that whatever edge Google has there, I mean, they could maintain it if they want to make a commitment to, like, we're going to have the highest quality models. We do all this white glove, rigorous stuff. But that's a small margin for them. That's going to be the 2% advantage, not this, not a moat.
So can you speak to the significance of Meta's Llama leak?
Yeah, that was a big deal. The foundational models that exist, that human beings have created, prior to that point, were pretty much done by large corporations, or there's a couple, depending on how you want to count them, that some academic institutions have built. And in order to build those things, you need to invest a massive amount of compute. Some of these, I think, I don't want to throw numbers around, but millions of dollars, maybe a $10 million training session would not be impossible to have occurred. Massive capital investment. And out the other end, you get something you can save to a file that is maybe 128 gigabytes large. So that's large, but it's not humongous. You can put that on a flash drive. So you made a multi-million-dollar investment. That's just in the compute, not even in the people and everything else. And out of it came something that can be put on a flash drive. I didn't know that was going to get out to the public so fast. I knew eventually there'd be a collective effort like, let's build an open source one. But the fact that this leaked now means we know the secret recipe and we can start working with it.
Right. And it also says, tell me the significance of this, because I'm learning here too. It says that model had no instruction or conversation tuning and no real human feedback.
Yeah. So there's a lot that goes on with the models you've talked to between when the training completes and when you get to them. They have some special prompting going on in the background, some fine-tuning, some additional steps. The training really is just to build the core model, and two enhancements you might want to do. The one about conversational tuning is to make sure that it's built to try and have this back and forth conversation. Like, without that, one thing that could happen is you ask it to start explaining something and it never pauses, never gives you a chance to talk. And then the other point, not having any human feedback loops means it's not learning or adapting in any way. So the degree to which that RL part is important, that reinforcement learning human feedback, it doesn't have that. But you know what? We can build our own version of that.
All right. And the article says, here we are barely a month later after that leak, and there are variants of that model with instruction tuning, quantization, quality improvements, human evals, multimodality, and reinforcement learning, and many built on top of each other. So that's how quick open source can move when what they're trying to illustrate here is that open source is moving faster, and as such, there's not really a moat because the companies can't move as fast as the passionate global, developer base. Right?
Yeah, they're turning stuff around in a few days. Corporations aren't good at that.
And it says, most importantly, they have solved the scaling problem to the extent that anyone can tinker. So many of these new ideas are from ordinary people. Now, I have a question. It would seem to me that even though that model was leaked and it had no reinforcement learning and human feedback, doesn't OpenAI's concept of being able to just thumbs up or thumbs down and give feedback on the output that you got, wouldn't that allow them to have higher quality output? Or does it just make more noise? Are people reliable when it comes to giving feedback at such scale through a company like OpenAI?
I think it's a non-trivial task to use that data effectively, but it definitely has a lot of value in it. You're right. Some people are just going to be kind of like clicking it randomly. I don't know, some drunk person talking to it. But some people will legitimately give good, useful, helpful feedback. So your system would have to be able to recognize between those two things, or maybe even categorize, like I'm sure there's different styles of complaints people might have, from the grammar was off to the facts are wrong to the emphasis seems bad, something along those lines. So it's for sure a project in how you use that feedback, but one that a mid-range grad student could probably take on.
Great. So how does that actually affect their moat? Because they have such a wide user base and they should actually be able to use that data in some reliable way. Is it that their model will eventually be leaked or trained? Another model will be trained as well as their model? I mean, what makes it seems that they would have some kind of secret or scaling moat there, as you've mentioned before.
Yeah, Google's ability to access a large number of people is part of what I think is their remaining moat. So the degree to which you need human in the loop feedback, which I think you do, they'll be of the best, probably the best at getting that feedback quickly, efficiently, and using it. I don't know that that's the golden ticket that, as long as you're in the lead with having human in the loop feedback, you're going to be the category winner. It seems like it is an advantage, but not one that gives you a moat.
Okay, so they've also mentioned LoRa or low rank adaptation. How does that play into this? Because it seems that that's a mechanism for fine tuning that perhaps obviates the need for as much reinforcement learning.
Sort of. So that's a process, an algorithm or methodology for doing some of the fine tuning and retraining steps that make it much more efficient. If you didn't know that technique, if you just tried to retrain using the standard training process, you can still do it, but it would be more computationally expensive. So this is like a shortcut, clever trick kind of thing that people have figured out. So the fact that Google owns a big server farm, that is an advantage, but it's not an advantage that prevents other people from doing fine tuning.
Right, and that's exactly what I'm reading here, is that moat really is being overcome algorithmically. The moat of having the compute power is becoming not a moat anymore.
Yeah, there'll be some back and forth on this. Like, obviously, the goal was let's build large language models, and that was achieved. The next goal is let's build them in a cost-effective, efficient way.
Right, and this says part of what makes LoRa so effective is that, like other forms of fine-tuning, it's stackable. Improvements like instruction tuning can be applied and then leveraged as other contributors add on dialogue or reasoning or tool use. While the individual fine-tunings are low rank, their sum need not be, allowing a full rank updates to the model to accumulate over time. Okay, so in here they also say that some of these models are already largely indistinguishable from ChatGPT. Would you find that to be true?
I haven't firmly explored that, but I wouldn't fight too hard. That could be fair.
I mean, there's probably some edges where ChatGPT has a more knowledge or is better trained, but for all intents and purposes, the way most people interact is not at the edges; it's in the center. And for lack of a better word,
yeah, no, I think that there's some truth to that. It's really hard to measure this kind of stuff, and it's on some level subjective, and maybe it always will be, because, help me understand some concept, getting 3 different answers, there's not always going to be a consensus as to which is the best answer.
All right. So next up is this idea that we're starting to see more training on small, highly curated data sets.
Yeah.
Which also would, from what I can tell, would strip some of the moat that Google and OpenAI might have, because they are very good at, extracting data from the entire web or these very large data sets. If you don't need access to these very large data sets and you can train on a really high quality one, that seems to reduce that moat. Is that an accurate representation?
Absolutely, yeah. Having good quality data is what some people consider a moat in and of itself, and it's one Google doesn't have.
One of the things they say, which I thought is exactly right, who would pay for a Google product with usage restrictions if there is a free, high-quality alternative without them? And this applies to OpenAI as well.
It applies to all products.
If you can get one developer, which is literally what it's sounding like it's going to require, one developer to stand up the model and have it available on your back-end systems, and there's a very clear way to interface with it, which I'm sure the open source community either already has or will have very shortly, an API. You can do what you like with that model and also probably save money by just standing it up in your closed environment on your own without changes in the output. Like once you've established that this model is what you want, it's not randomly going to change or start spitting out weird things because OpenAI updated it.
Yeah.
This is good. Individuals are not constrained by licenses to the same degree as corporations. Well, needs no comment, but that's exactly right. And I think the same applies to the idea that we might put restrictions on AI research. Basically, you're putting restrictions on the corporations and a lot less on the individuals, because people can still do that research all they want, and they probably will. And all you're going to do is slow down the big companies. But it seems like the cat's out of the bag anyway.
And, this is all the degree to which it's gloom and doom. It's gloom and doom for the large tech companies, which, not that makes you intrinsically worthy of being a punching bag, but if there's a silver lining here, it's that, small firms, small people, individuals can still be major contributors here. We're not all going to just live in some couple corporation states.
Right. And this article also has a timeline of how the vast improvement happened after Meta accidentally released its Llama model. So we'll link that in the show notes.
Yeah, it's insane how fast things turned around.
But I will circle back on this and say, at the outset of this, we said, what is the moat? Is there a moat? And you had said that it's tiny, but there is something of a moat. And after talking through this, it seems like the only real moat, and it's tiny, is the reach that Google and OpenAI may have and their ability to not only reach people, but also scale that reach to those people. Beyond that, it doesn't seem like there's much of a moat technologically anymore. Maybe at the edges for fine-tuning the model, but like we said, most people operate on the center. Like, to use a simple example, probably the most often use case that I know of using ChatGPT is just to ask it a few questions, get some general understanding of something, or to summarize some bullet points into an email or write a few emails for you. My guess is that those models that are high quality, maybe they're not as perfect as ChatGPT, but they're probably 95% there. And for those cases I just described, are going to be plenty good. I'm sure that if I asked one of those open source models to tell me about, mammals, and it could probably explain that. Like, I'm writing a report on mammals, I'm writing a report on the origins of the internet. My guess is it would be pretty darn good.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
After having talked about it a little bit more, there's a slight moat, and that moat just involves scale to reach and, maybe back-end scaling.
Yeah, and the ubiquity of the brand and access they have.
Definitely. I'm looking forward to seeing what happens in the future here, because so much has happened in 3 months.
I know.
I can only imagine a year or 2 years from now. As I've seen recently, there was someone that said, remember that today is the worst that AI will ever be. And that's kind of a frightening proposition.
I tend to agree with that, yeah.
I mean, I don't know that it's frightening, but it is definitely interesting.
Absolutely.